Hi, welcome to Campbell and Ferrara. My name is Jane Stanley, and today we're going to be talking about perennials. But the first thing I want to talk about is how to create a garden that's going to be a good environment for your perennials. So most of you, if you go and dig in your backyard and you've never done anything before, will probably start digging up something that looks like that. And it's a good old Virginia clay, so lots of rocks and just really not a good environment for your plant. What your plant wants is something that looks more like this. So a fine textured, dark soil that's high in organic matter. What happens when you have a soil like this is when it gets wet, it basically turns into a pot. We have such high clay content around here that if you just dig a hole and put your plant in it, basically you've planted your plant into a container within the ground. So anytime that you're putting in perennials, you want to mix in some nice organic matter, either the bumper crop or the leaf compost. Those are both excellent options. And what we recommend is that you do a 50-50 mixture. So 50% of your native soil and 50% of the organic soil amendment. And what that does is it makes a gradual transition for the plant from the amended soil into the more compacted clay. Because if you were to just dig out the clay and replace all of it with the composted material, you'd end up with that same effect. Your plant would have a really nice time for the first couple of months building that root system, but then once it hit the compacted clay, it wouldn't be used to dealing with that sort of soil and it would just stop. And so you'd, again, end up with that effect of almost planting within a container in your ground. So once you get past that, the next thing that you want to think about is how to care for your perennials long term, because they're going to be in the ground for years and years and years. You want to think about how you're going to fertilize them and encourage them to do well each year. And the nice thing about perennials is they're generally not heavy feeders. They don't need a lot of fertilizer. The best thing to do is to top dress with compost, and the bumper crop and the leaf grow are both excellent options. And when I say top dress, I mean in the fall just laying a small layer of that on top, no more than half an inch to an inch or so, and just putting that on top of the whole bed, and that's going to work its way in and decompose gradually over time and give your plant a slow release of nutrients, because often they're not going to need fertilizers the way that annuals would. They don't need Miracle Grow. They don't need something that's got a really high rate of fertilization. They just need a nice slow release. So another good option for that is Osmocote. And this is, again, a granular, slow-release fertilizer. You can just sprinkle it around the plant once in spring, and that'll feed it for the whole season. So it's the easiest thing to do. Dividing your perennials. So because they're coming back year after year, eventually they're going to end up looking sort of like this. This is a very full plant. This is a hosta, and it's got a lot going on here. And we recommend that you divide your perennials usually sort of every 3 to 5 years. And that's going to help maximize the bloom. Because after a while, the plant and that root system are just going to get tired of supporting so much foliage, and you're going to see compromises on the bloom because it's working so hard to support all the leaves that it doesn't have energy to put toward flowering. You just want to go, probably about 6 inches or so away from the crown of the plant so that you don't disturb the roots too much when you're bringing it up. And then you can just take it right out. And you can see here, this guy's got a nice, healthy root system on him. You want to look for lots of bright white roots. Those are roots that are alive and healthy and doing well. If you see any that are kind of slimy or brown or black, those are dead roots, and you can just cut those or pull those right off the plant. They're not doing anything for it anyway. And then the first thing that we want to do is just start loosening the soil a little bit. Get off as much of that excess soil as we can. For something this size, though, I would recommend that you start just by splitting it in half or into quarters. And usually, if they're nice and small, it's easy enough that you just sort of pull back and forth. And because they're already in these, they naturally grow into these divisions. And with things like hostas and daylilies, you don't need to be afraid of hurting them, because you're not going to. Even, if this plant lost, half or a third of its leaves, it would still be fine. For now, we're just going to put them into a pot. I've got some nice potting mix in there already. The other thing to keep in mind is if you are putting them into pots or if you're transplanting them somewhere, you always want to start with, make sure your soil medium is a little bit moist. You never want to put them into dry soil. It's really stressful on the roots. So even if you just spray down your potting mix or lightly wet your amendments before you use them, you don't need to soak them, just make sure they're a little bit moist. So we're just going to spread the roots out as we put it in. Have you all seen this plant before? Hen and chicks or sempervivum. It's actually in the same sort of family as the cactus and the succulents. And this guy, he almost roots by himself, so he's really, really easy. And you can start with just a tiny little pot, and we'll just get some of our potting mix in there. You can just fill it right up, and then take your pruners. And you can see these guys grow with the little chicks coming off. And you can actually just take that, snip it right off, stick it down into your potting mix, and you're done. That's it, you've got yourself a new plant. It's going to take it a couple weeks, but it's going to start putting out roots, and within a month or so you're going to have a fully rooted, healthy, ready-to-go plant. It's the easiest thing in the world, and you can do that with every single one of these. So you can take this guy and get about 8 more plants out of him if you want. As this is a lovely salvia, or meadow sage. As you can see, these guys usually bloom in early spring, mid-spring, but this one's starting to get to the point where it's pretty much done blooming. Now the nice thing about these guys is that if we actually go in here and prune back these old spent flowers, and it's going to fill out in another month or so, it's going to send up a whole new flush of flowers, and it's going to flower again. I'm going to show you how we're going to take care of pruning this. I want to mention the first thing that you want to do with your pruners before you start doing anything is to clean them. The first thing that I want to point out here is this plant has actually been pruned a little bit before, and you'll see the last time it was pruned, it wasn't cut down quite far enough. So the person stopped here and they cut too close to the last leaf. And so what ended up happening is that leaf actually died, and so when we take that off, we're just left with this stem, which is also going to die because it's not supporting any growth. So when you're pruning, and say we're taking off this, what we actually want to do is go back to the next part where it makes a main junction. So we're going to cut it all the way back to there. And the nice thing about perennials, unlike trees and shrubs and things, is you're not worried about basically woody growth that you're going to have every year because it's going to start over fresh. So you don't have to be as concerned about what it looks like when you prune it, and you don't have to be afraid about cutting it back too far. In fact, with these guys, it's better to err on the side of taking off more growth because it's going to send up a new flush. And what you're going to end up with is going to look a little bit bare. It might even look a little scraggly, but it's better for it to be cut back more now because that gives it a fresh base to start from. And if you look down in there, you can see we've already got some new growth coming on the tiny leaves down near the base. And so within a few weeks, this plant will be back up and ready to go. And so the first thing we want to talk about is how to extend your bloom season. We're in June right now. This is peak perennial time. It's actually perennial gardening month, according to the Perennial Plant Association. So this is when most of the perennials are going to be in flower at their peak, doing their thing. But we want to talk about, the early spring and the late fall, which are not peak times for perennials, because there's actually a lot of interest to be had at those times as well. And so the first thing I want to show you are some of my favorite early spring perennials. This is one, most of you have probably seen this. This is creeping phlox, or Phlox subulata. It's actually an evergreen ground cover. And in early spring, you'll see it on hillsides and rock gardens, and it is just loaded with pink and lavender and white flowers. It just looks like people's yards are carpeted in little flowers. And that's one of the earliest things that's going to bloom for you in the spring, and it's beautiful. And that loves full sun. It'll take full sun, drought. If you've got a hill slope, a rock garden, it's a great plant for that. Another one of my favorites, this is pulmonaria, or lungwort. This is for your shade garden. And it's nice because it's got this rough texture on the leaves that's actually really displeasing to deer. So this is a great deer-resistant option if that's a problem for you. And you're not going to see them now, but these are loaded with really sweet bell-shaped pink and purple flowers in early spring. And these guys actually have a pretty nice long bloom season, so these you'll get probably 3 to 5 weeks of bloom out of these in early spring. This is bloodroot. And the way this guy works is the first thing that he sends up are flowers, and they're small white flowers. Again, very early in spring. This is another woodland plant, so for shade. And then once the flowers are gone, then it sends up these really uniquely shaped leaves. And you'll have those for several months after the flowers are gone. And the reason that it's called bloodroot is because if you actually break the stem of the leaves off, it secretes this sap that's like this orangish reddish color. And so that's why it's bloodroot, because it looks like it's blood. And I can tell you, as a small child going for nature walks in the forest with my father, it's a very powerful image that, plants are alive and they bleed too. I want to talk about some perennials that are really great for the fall. And the first one here, this is plumbago. And I love this one. This one is used mostly as a ground cover. This is about as tall as it's ever going to get. This one likes full sun. It can take drought and harsh conditions. It doesn't mind your bad clay soil. But it gets really beautiful, bright blue flowers that are going to last all summer long. I mean, it starts flowering now, and it's going to flower well into August. But what's really nice about this plant is that in the fall, the foliage is all going to turn bright red. So it gets fall color the way that your maples get fall color. So it's a really great one to have in your garden, to look out and see fall color on your lawn. And this one is for shade. This is Semicifuga, or bugbane. And this one's great because you have this beautiful fine leaf foliage all during the spring and summer, but it's going to wait until about August to actually flower. And when it does, it's going to have these nice long sort of tendrils or spikes of fine white flowers. Another favorite of mine for fall interest for your shade, this is a Japanese anemone, or woodland anemone. And these are going to bloom, this one's called September Charm, because that's traditionally when it blooms. And they have the same way that you would think of like the spring anemones that are annuals, or the little snowdrop anemones. They have that same sort of flower, but they aren't going to flower until August and into September. So another great way for you to have some fall interest. And again, this one's for shade. This is solidago, or goldenrod. And don't let anybody tell you that they're allergic to goldenrod. They get a bad rap. It's actually the ragweed that blooms at the same time and has the same sort of yellowish flower. That's the allergen. The goldenrod, it's not their fault. Not their fault. These guys, this is actually an early blooming variety, but these are traditionally, you'll see them all along the roadsides. It's one of our native plants, all along the roadsides in the fall. Beautiful, bright yellow flowers will really brighten up your garden, and that is for sun. This is cardinal flower, or lobelia. And this loves sun, and it can take boggy conditions. So if you have standing water, this guy will love it. And it gets gorgeous, bright red flowers. They're a unique shape. You've probably seen them before. I see a couple of you nodding. But really just a wonderful plant, wonderful plant. This next one is another bog plant for sun. And this is turtlehead, or cleany. And it's, again, a native plant. And it comes either in white flowers or in pink flowers. And this one's also nice because it's another way to bring some late season interest. This is going to be a very late summer and sometimes even into fall bloomer. So that's a great option. If you're looking for an area that's just naturally really rocky and difficult to keep watered, these plants are great options. This is one of my favorites. This is Gora, or whirling butterflies, because the flowers look like little butterflies. And this is great planted in masses, because when the wind blows through it, it just looks like it's full of little butterflies dancing across. And bees and butterflies, pollinators love this plant. But moving into the sun a little bit, the coneflower, the echinacea, have just had a huge explosion in the last couple of years. The hybridizers have just been going crazy. So there are all sorts of varieties out there. And one of the new things that they're doing is creating double flowers. So they're almost like pom-poms. This particular variety is called meringue, but they've got ones in pinks and oranges and purples, yellows, all sorts of different things. And they're also starting to hybridize coneflower that are particularly fragrant. And so those are nice too. The one thing to be careful of with, when an explosion like this happens, when there's a lot of new interest in a plant, you want to make sure that, you want the new and interesting and exciting stuff. You want to make sure that it's a variety that's been tested really well. And that's one thing that we really work on with our growers, is communication about that. With saying, what varieties have you grown for a couple of years and you can say it's really a good plant, as opposed to what's, the latest, coolest thing, but maybe it doesn't really perform well in the garden. So I promise you we've done a lot of the legwork for you. So we're trying to only offer you the best varieties and the best plants that we can. Thank you all for coming, for stopping by Campbell and Ferrara, and we'll see you in the garden center.